Okay, we seem to have stabilized at people signing on, so we'll get started. My name is Dave Ferrari. I'm the secretary of the Patterson Museum Foundation. I'm standing in as MC tonight for Glenn Corbett, our president, who's in traffic at the moment. Um, Tonight, our presentation is given by Richard Polton. Um, it is about the Barbour family in Paterson. And I'm going to ask anybody who has a question to please put it in the chat. I'm sorry, put it in the Q&A, but we'll check the chat too if any end up there. And then we will answer those questions at the end of Richard's presentation. I will also be posting a link to the foundation website's donate page. If you enjoy this presentation, we are always very happy to receive donations. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our speaker, Richard Polton, who is a noted author as well as co-president of the what is it? It's the proper name, the
I'm not sure.
Jewish Historical Society
Jewish
of North
Historical
Jersey.
Society
Is that right?
of Northern New Jersey. And I'm
Okay.
also a board member of the Hamilton Partnership for Paterson, the Friends Group of the National Park. And both of those interests came together in this story today. So thank you. And thank you, Dave. And here's, I also want to thank all of you for joining wherever you are. This is my second talk for the Paterson Museum Foundation. My first presentation on Paterson's architecture in the Victorian era proved to be an internet sensation. Well, I tell myself that anyway. It did receive a lot of views on the YouTube site, and it also resulted in a book entitled Paterson's Industrial Age, which is now published by Arcadia and is out as a friendly reminder. The holidays are coming, and I hope you would consider the book as a stocking stuffer. The museum has copies for sale, and all of the proceeds from the sale at the museum will go to the Paterson Museum Foundation. If that's out of the way for you, you can pick it up at Barnes and Noble or Amazon. But seriously, I'm glad you're here, and let me share the screen, and we can.
Rich, can I mention can I mention the event?
Please
the
do.
date was set.
I think
I don't have my.
I think we're going to have a book signing at the Paterson Museum, and I think that's planned for. I think it's December 9th. I'm not sure if
that sounds right.
This is the story of the Barbour family, a prominent part of Paterson's history, and one of the significant Barbour family members. Our story begins in Scotland, where the Barbour family started a linen thread business in 1739. John Barbour opened the business in Kilbarchan, Scotland. This is one of the areas of early textile manufacturing. And the work of making linen thread was primitive, but in spite of all of the things that could go wrong, the family was quite successful. In 1784, the Barbours relocated to Lisburn in Northern Ireland to take advantage of proximity to linen source materials, as well as a steady supply of labor that was available. These were the early years of the Industrial Revolution, and the firm began with little machinery and lots of reliance on difficult labor-intensive work. Over the course of several generations in Northern Ireland, the Barbour family combined solid business practices and with new technology and a vibrant workforce. In time, the growing enterprise was well known, even finding international markets. By 1842, Barbour had introduced numerous custom-made machinery to increase production, and the company continued to prosper. The Barbour Mill was, as I said, was relocated in 1784 to Hildon near Lisburn in Ireland. And after the founder, John Barbour's death, his son William led the move and built up the business. Barbour became one of the first water-powered mills on the River Langan. The site was originally a derelict mill. The company kept building and expanding so that by the end of the 19th century, the mill that you see in this image was the largest linen thread manufacturer in the world. And you can see they also maintained reference to Kilbarchan to maintain the original site in Scotland. The Barbour practice was to create a comprehensive environment for workers, including housing and some social facilities as well. It was an important company town. This diagram shows the Barbour family tree and the generations of Barbours and how they ended up in Paterson. The line of succession reflects the stability of ownership over multiple generations. And the company was able to adapt over several hundred years. As the company continued into the 19th century, a fourth generation of Barbours took over the company. According to all the histories, the family business had a surplus of children who wanted to be part of the business. And the sons of William Barbour of Hildon became experts in varying parts of the business. You see their names there, and they developed expertise in trade and machinery production and machinery building, finance, etc. As the company succeeded, they began thinking about other opportunities outside of Ireland in other industrializing areas. Remember that the mid-19th century was a time of rapid industrialization. Markets and economic conditions were changing, and the family recognized that there were other areas where they might be able to become successful. Two members of the family relocated to the United States. Here's a little background. In 1849, Thomas Barbour arrived in New York City at the age of 17. Initially, he had a sales position with a linen thread business and was doing quite well, but he was working for somebody outside of the family. By 1852, he began an American outlet for the family business as a broker and sales representative, selling the company's linen thread. His brother Samuel also spent some time in New York, but returned back to Northern Ireland for family reasons. Things began to change in the United States. During the American Civil War era, tariffs on imports and foreign manufacturers were increased, while taxes were lifted on flax spinning machinery, and the opportunities to become an American affiliate or to have an American affiliate of the Barbour Company made sense. Thomas's brother Robert joined the business, and he had the manufacturing expertise that was needed for manufacturing. They were successful in their business efforts and looked to expand, and they were well known in New York City. The Barbours were known as being big physically, big intellectually, and big gastronomically. And the brothers' plans were as large as their proportions, according to local writing. When they made the decision to open an American operation, the Barbours chose Paterson. By this time, Paterson was pretty well established as a manufacturing center, and Paterson made sense. It had plenty of water, which was a necessary part of the linen manufacturing process. It had the raceway system that was needed to power mills, and it had proximity to New York and its port. In addition, both land and labor were available, and the city was in a mode of welcoming industry. In 1864, the house of William Barbour and Sons, the parent company, established branch works in Paterson in the building shown here, which is still standing on Spruce Street, operating as the Barbour Flax Spinning Company with Thomas as its president. The firm leased and then purchased factories and acquired housing necessary for their workers and obtained the necessary water privileges that were needed to power the flax machinery that they imported from Ireland. In 1867, only 3 years after the Barbours took control of the Paterson plant, the factory already employed 450 laborers in the manufacture of linen thread, and the Barbours were recruiting labor from Ireland and Italy. Within a very short period of time, the company needed to expand again, and in 1872, the foundations of the Grand Street building were laid, and that would become the largest of the three Paterson mills. This slide shows the three major factories in Paterson. Two are in the Great Falls area and the other on Grand Street, which is now across the street from the county administration building. By 1881, the production of the firm was almost $2.5 million, and they employed 1,600 workers. Their continued affiliation with William Barbour and Sons in Northern Ireland proved to be a major benefit and provided financial, technological, and marketing advantages. Think about this: at its production peak, the Grand Street Mill alone covered 340,000 square feet of floor space, employed 900 people, operating 14,000 spinning spindles, and occupied 12 acres of land in the city of Paterson. A large number of the employees, the tradesmen, were brought over from Ireland. The Paterson branch of the operation was modeled after operations in Ireland, and the origin of the neighborhood name Little Dublin for an area in South Paterson is largely attributable to the number of Irish workers who were encouraged to migrate for work in the Barbour mills. The production was focused on the manufacturing of shoe threads and other linen threads, which were required for a variety of leather manufacturing and other uses, netting, all kinds of industrial uses. In short order, the Barbour Linen Thread Company had international impact. This advertisement from the 19th century shows the location of their offices in New York and their affiliated companies around the world connected with Lisburn. And they were the international leader of linen thread manufacturing, which was an essential part of industry during that period. And working for the Barbours was more than just a factory job. It was they had an impact socially, and this is an image of the Barbour Grand Street baseball team. The Barbour lifestyles grew to match their ambitions and their success. This is the last remaining Barbour residence in Paterson, and I'm including it to show their rise in economic prominence. This is on East 38th Street, right off of Broadway. In 1910, Robert Edwards Barbour, a grandson of one of the two Barbours and a nephew or a cousin of William Warren Barbour, built this 42-room mansion and named it Kilbarcan. The property is still standing, but it's in a poor state of repair. For those of you who know Paterson, the building is still on just off Broadway on Route 4, on the grounds above the former Paterson Catholic School. By the end of the 19th century, the company's leadership transitioned from Robert and Thomas Barbour to the next generation of Barbers. And we're going to focus on Thomas's son, William, who emerged as a family leader, an effective business person, and the big thinker who saw the world beyond the Passaic River. So we're focusing on the family of Colonel William Barbour and Adelaide Sprague Barbour. William Barbour lived in a time of historic expansion of the American economy during the last half of the 19th century. He was born in 1857 and died in 1917. This was Paterson's industrial era, and he lived it to the full, taking full advantage of the opportunities that were transforming the country. William Barbour was born in New York City, but grew up in the Paterson area while his family was establishing their Paterson enterprise. His father and uncle were an important part of the local economy and the local political and social landscape. By the time he was a young man, Barbour Brothers was very successful, and he had opportunities in an education that was somewhat was exceptional and extraordinary. He received his early education at a private school in Paterson, and then attended high school at the High Street Academy in Newark. William had an unusual education, reflecting his father, Thomas Barbour's ambitions and view of the future. Instead of college, William was encouraged to travel, and that he did throughout Europe, spending 2 years in Hanover, Germany, and 1 year in Tours in France. During his years in Europe, William became familiar with the languages and growing industries of Germany and France. During his stay in Germany, he became a close friend of Fritz Krupp, the heir to the German munitions manufacturer. When the two friends parted, they made an agreement that when the opportunity arose, they would each name a son after the other. According to the family history, Krupp could not fill his bargain. He had only daughters. But William named his fourth and youngest son Fritz Krupp Barbour. The name was unfortunate after the outbreak of World War I, and Fritz became Frederick and served in the U.S. military. William Barbour was very well connected with the business and political elite in New Jersey, and participated in a wide range of boards and committees and clubs. It's also important to point out that Paterson, during this period, was really a center of political influence and power. Barbour was in the thick of all of it. This was a time when Garrett Hobart was a rising political star, ultimately becoming the Vice President of the United States. In addition, John W. Griggs, another Paterson attorney, was an important and influential political leader. He served as governor and then U.S. Attorney General, while William Barbour was serving on the military staff of John Griggs. He earned the honorific title, the Colonel. This was a title he used for the rest of his career. William Barbour's business acumen was extraordinary. The Linen Flax Spinning Company was a powerful brand, and the Colonel, in conjunction with his cousin John Milne Barbour, who's founded the Linen Thread Company in 1898, which was an international combination of all of the former Barbour flax businesses and many of their previous competitors. This new venture captured the recently appreciated benefits of vertical integration, and was able to locate corporations of linen thread manufacturing where they were most effective and profitable. They were a vertically integrated international corporation that early in the process, and the company really benefited from his insight. Um, the Barbour products were the standard for many essential products of the time. The Barbers made linen thread for shoes, for gloves, for buttons, for upholstery, carpets, automobile interiors, saddles, fishing nets, golf clubs, bookbinding, crocheting, as well as other domestic products. Additionally, around 1899, the Colonel and a few of his business acquaintances formed the United United Shoe Machinery, a New Jersey incorporated company that was headquartered in Boston. Oops. William's wife was Julia Adelaide Sprague, a tall, elegant, and imposing woman who had strong principles and a proper background. They were married in 1883. Adelaide was a direct descendant of Richard Warren, who arrived in Massachusetts in 1620 aboard the Mayflower. The name Warren has significance to the Barbour family. The Colonel's hometown in Bergen County, now known as Fairlawn, was an estate called Warren Point, and that name still can be found in the local area. By all accounts, Adelaide Sprague was a strong and proper personality who shaped the attitudes of all of her children. This photo shows the entire family of the Colonel and Mrs. Barbour. The Colonel's favorite place in the world was Paradise Point, a compound on a large estate off of Tupper Lake in the Adirondacks. Although I am not certain, it's likely that this picture is the setting for this photograph. The picture shows the proud parents with their 4 sons, Frederick, Warren, Robert, and Thomas. Warren, about whom we'll be talking a lot more very soon, is the third on the left with his arm around his dad. Thomas, the firstborn, is an interesting story in his own right. At age 15, Thomas Barbour was taken on a visit to Harvard University, and where he was entranced by the Museum of Comparative Zoology. He was determined to attend Harvard, and so he did. At Harvard, he studied under Alexander Agassiz, son of Louis Agassiz, and received a BA, an MA, and a PhD from Harvard. He joined the faculty in 1911 when his doctoral dissertation was published, and he took a position as the curator of reptiles and amphibians at the Museum of Comparative Zoology. Eventually, he became the Alexander Agassiz Professor of Zoology, and in 1927 was the director of the museum. He was considered one of the great naturalists of his day, and he was a renowned traveler and documentarian of all kinds of natural life throughout many portions of the world. He was obviously well known in his field. Colonel Barbour loved to build things, and the Barbour residence in the city of New York was located at 1315 West 53rd Street. As a youngster, Warren Barbour spent his school years in the city in this elegant townhouse located just off of Fifth Avenue in one of the most fashionable locations in the city. The home was completed in 1903 and was designed by C.P.H. Gilbert. The limestone townhouse was a state-of-the-art building with its own power plant and an early electric elevator. It's rather hard to believe, but this beautiful building had a lifespan of just about 30 years. In 1925, the home was purchased after the Barbours had transitioned to other locations. The home was purchased by John D. Rockefeller, who bought up all of the available property on the block bounded by 53rd and 54th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue. In 1931, it was announced that the site would become the home of the Museum of Modern Art. Ultimately, the house was demolished in 1939 and, in fact, is the location of the Museum of Modern Art. The Barbour family had homes in Monmouth County in the Rumson area, and this is the location that was considered by the younger as home by the younger members of the family. Ultimately, in 1930, Warren Barbour and his family made their primary residence in that part of the world. I'm going to focus now on the life of Warren Barbour. It's his remarkable story that really has shaped this program. Colonel and Adelaide's third son was born in 1888, July 31st, 1888, in Monmouth Beach in New Jersey. He was named William Warren. The Barbours had a handful of names that they kept recycling, although he was named Warren to distinguish himself from his father, another tie to the name Warren. After his years in New York private school, the Colonel and Mrs. Barbour gave their son the option of attending Princeton or engaging in a more practical education. Warren was a sizable young man, and it was likely that he would have played football for the Princeton Tigers. As an alternative, he was offered the opportunity to work in his father's office at a salary of $100 a month and learn firsthand at a young age the duties which would someday become obligations. After thinking this over, Warren decided to forego college and begin his career working for the Linen Company. I haven't seen a description of exactly what Warren did for the Linen Company. In all likelihood, he had some exposure to both the company offices and the factory floor. But it was a choice that he looked back on with pride. Less than a year after he began work at the company, Warren was stricken with tuberculosis and was sent to the family's estate in the Adirondacks to recover. He returned to New Jersey healed but significantly overweight, prompting his parents to insist that he undertake a daily exercise routine. The family and Warren agreed to work with a boxing coach named Jack Cooper, who was an accomplished former fighter himself with a major following in New York society. Slowly, Warren Barbour worked himself into great shape, standing at 6'2" and 204 pounds. He was sparring with accomplished boxers and gentlemen boxers far older than he was. The team behind Warren Barbour determined that he was ready to test his skills with more accomplished opponents. With Cooper's coaching and advice, he entered the World Heavyweight Amateur Championship in Boston. In April 1910, Barbour took on two well-regarded opponents in a single night and beat both of them to win the World Amateur Heavyweight Championship. On the first night of the tournament, Barbour was given a bye, but on day two, April 2nd, 1910, his first fight was against New England's champion, Kendall Salisbury. After a challenging bout with a hard-charging brawler, Joe Burke, Barbour was declared champ. He was all of 22 years old. The ringside crowd was skeptical that a young fellow with what was called a wad of money big enough to choke a horse would amount to much, but Barbour proved to be a very talented boxer. After the fight, his father jumped into the ring to congratulate his son. There was a party afterward that evening at a local hotel that Barbour attended. It proved to be a defining moment of the young man's life. After the fight, there was talk of a professional career. His parents were absolutely opposed to it. They objected to their son fighting for any kind of financial reward on the grounds that profit would taint the integrity of the sport. They even spurred promoters' suggestions that he be given other sorts of prizes instead, such as a watch or a gold cup. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Let's put boxing into some context in the early 20th century. The era's professional boxing champion and historic personality, of course, was Jack Johnson, the first African American fighter to win the national heavyweight title. He captured the crown in December 1908, just a few years before Barbour won the amateur championship. In the words of Ken Burns in his documentary, Unforgivable Blackness, The Rise and Fall of Jack Johnson, for more than 13 years, Jack Johnson was the most famous and most notorious African American on earth. He was a symbol of great pride to blacks, but he was despised and resented by many whites in a highly polarized and racially contentious era. Johnson's victories were often closely followed by outbreaks of fatal violence, often against always against blacks. In 1912, just 2 years after Barbour's championship win, Congress went so far as to ban the interstate transportation of films of boxing matches, a measure that was aimed at what was regarded as humiliating scenes of a black man defeating his white opponent. Johnson's victories were seen by many whites as a threat to the natural order and preferred order of civilization. Almost as soon as Johnson won the championship in 1908, promoters began looking for a white opponent who might be able to defeat him. This, of course, was the origin of the term Great White Hope, and which became immortalized on stage and screen. And guess who was considered as a Great White Hope? Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Here are some newspaper articles touting Warren Barbour as the Great White Hope. In short order, Barbour's success in his well-publicized bouts earned him national prominence and put his name into the public conversation about which white boxer might be able to challenge Johnson. Among those publicly urging Barbour to fight him was former President Theodore Roosevelt, a Barbour family friend who also trained in the Cooper Gym. The call for Barbour to step into that role went absolutely nowhere. It was reported that Barbour's mother objected, not out of concern of what would happen to her son. No, on the contrary, she expected that her son would win and was concerned about the ramifications for race relations. If her son Warren Barbour defeated Johnson, he would be remembered as the man who had smashed the African American community's most prominent hero. It was probably, it would have undermined any of his potential to work on behalf of minority groups. As you can see, these are some of the articles, including Gentleman Jim Corbett picking the millionaire boxer as the Great White Hope. It went nowhere. However, the boxing legacy became a defining part of Barbour's identity. It followed him throughout his professional and political career. Later, as a US Senator, Barbour would bring about the revocation of the ban on fight films. And of course, whenever he was considered for any kind of advancement or it became his name came into public view, he was known as the boxing champion. This article shows the ending of the ban on fight films. Of course, it's in 1939, 27 years after the initial ban. Leaving the boxing ring behind, Barbour returned to his career in business, working for his father in the Linen Thread Company in New York City. He also served during this time period in the New York National Guard and found enormous satisfaction as part of the Guard unit that was uh, uh, largely made up of some of the social elite in New York who were skilled horsemen. Militarily, he served as a member of the New York National Guard for 10 years, was stationed on the Mexican border in 1960, and rose to attain the rank of captain. However, life would change very quickly for Warren and all the Barbers. On the morning of March 1970, Colonel William Barbour went off to work feeling unwell. By that afternoon, he died of a heart failure. It was a shock to the family, and it changed everyone's life, most notably Warren Barbour. The boxing champ at age 22, now aged 29, became the successor to his father as the president of the company, the Linen Thread Company. The firm's increasing prominence soon propelled young Barbour into positions of power and prestige, including seats on boards of several banks, churches, clubs, and other institutions. In 1921, Warren Barbour married Elizabeth Cochran Carrere. Her uncle was the architect, John Carrere, who designed as part of the firm Carrere and Hastings, designed the New York Public Library and, for us, notably the Paterson City Hall. They had 3 children and set up their residence in the Rumson area, an established family location. As I mentioned, Warren Barbour was born not far away on Monmouth Beach, and it was an area that was popular with people of the Barbour's social standing. Soon after the marriage, Barbour entered political life, serving as a member of the Rumson Borough Council in 1922 and as mayor of Rumson from 1923 to 1928. Barbour was an active citizen during this period, during the 1920s and 1930s. He was exceedingly busy. He was running a successful business with 2 of his brothers. He also be serving as the mayor of Rumson, beginning in 1923 for 5 years. His family donated the town hall to the city of Rumson. And in 1931, his life changed again when Dwight Morrow, U.S. Senator at the time, and father of Anne Morrow Lindbergh, passed away in office. The Republican Party had the right to appoint a new senator, and Barbour was selected. And again, his boxing championship got him notice, and he ran for the balance of Morrow's term in 1932 and won. In 1936, that term was up, and it was during this period when FDR was at his most popular, and it was a bad time to run as a Republican. And so Barbour was returned to private life, where he ran a state unemployment program and was active again in a variety of other activities. Here's another image of him fighting the heavyweight championship, fighting for the Senate toga. I'm going to focus on his 1938 Senate campaign, because the brochures that he put out and his advertising highlights where he was at that point in his life. And I think it gives you some really insightful pictures of what Barbour stood for. He advertised himself as a progressive on a variety of social issues. He fought for the Social Security Act. He fought for the Wagner Housing Act and Labor Relations Act. And he was a rock-ribbed Republican. There's no question about it. He questioned a lot of the New Deal, but he was also, when something to him made sense, he was not afraid to stand up for it. And he was progressive on many of the social issues of his day. Um, he he was for unemployment relief, and this is a cause that seems rather ironic and somewhat humorous to us. During the Depression, there was an issue of discrimination against older workers. Well, who's an older worker? Anyone 40 years plus. And he campaigned on passing legislation to protect the rights of older workers, meaning those over the age of 40. It was a serious problem, something that I wouldn't have thought of as an issue. He also was very prominent in campaigning and legislating against anti-lynching. He supported the anti-lynching legislation and also legislation to prohibit reciprocal trade with any nation engaged in religious or racial persecutions. Very far-sighted social policy. Here, his brochure explains his background and his political bona fides. He was a boxing legend. It says that he worked on the factory floor and is sensitive to the issues of the working man. As the mayor of Rumson, he served locally in town hall. This is all according to his brochure. When he was appointed to the Senate seat for Dwight Morrow, he served with distinction. As we know, he lost in 36. And in the FDR landslide, but was running again. In his campaign for 38, he advertised himself as a fighter for fairness, a friend of the farmer. He was for soil conservation, payments for farmers, fought against wage lowering, fought for a minimum wage, protection in deflationary times, and a fierce advocate for local control. And again, he advertised publicly that he was a leading advocate for anti-lynching and a support for the Wagner Costigan anti-lynching measure, which ironically just got passed, or something similar just was passed in the Biden administration. It's taken that long. They introduced legislation into the Senate that would prohibit the U.S. from entering any reciprocal trade agreement with any nation engaged in religious or racial persecution. He was in strong support of racial and religious tolerance. The United States, in his campaign ads, should stand as a fortress for religious and political freedom. We need that voice today. Barbour was also fully aware and close, fully aware of the needs and close to the African American community. The political climate in the 1930s and 40s was far different from today. And Republicans campaigned as the party of Lincoln. Democrats in New Jersey were not so clear on this issue. They relied on political machines in Hudson and Essex County to bring out the vote and the control of patronage positions. African Americans saw the benefits and drawbacks of both parties and responded accordingly. Some Republicans were seen as friends of the African American community, and Barbour was clearly one of them. Here are some articles that show Barbour in his campaign mode from the black press in New Jersey during the time. This first article shows United Colored Republican Party Republican clubs have a massive outing or mammoth outing. I read that as Monmouth outing at first. And the Senate candidate will be the lead speaker. And that Senate candidate, of course, was Warren Barbour. This article in the Newark Herald, New Jersey's African American paper, is about the state's the coverage of Barbour's efforts for anti-lynching legislation, and additionally for ending segregation of public accommodations in the nation's capital. It had benefit. I mean, remember, New Jersey was not a state with a very large black or Jewish population during this period. It was growing, but they weren't a sizable political influencer that could swing an election. Barbour was doing it not because it was politically expedient, but because it was the right thing to do, and it had political benefits for him. He outperformed other Republicans with black voters, and I think he did it again out of conscience and because it was the right thing to do. During this period, he was also active in an organization called the Council Against Intolerance in America. This is their letterhead, and it shows William Warren Barbour on the top as the chair of this organization. It was a New York-based group that was active from the late 1930s through the 1940s, and it was founded by a liberal Jewish author named James Waterman Wise, whose father was Stephen Wise, a noted rabbi in New York. It was notable because it warned of the dangers of Nazism and discrimination and racial and religious hate, and beginning back as early as 1933. It had a very ecumenical board made up of well-meaning and liberal-minded people of a variety of backgrounds. And you can see the letterhead on the left has a list of them. Their goal was to put together programs, educational material, and publications that would raise the issue in a positive way. The council's educational department printed teachers' manuals and books to be used in adult reading groups. And the group's rhetoric was pro-American, arguing that in its materials that prejudice and discrimination would undermine national unity in a time of growing international conflict. They did this map, which was widely circulated, that talked about the various ethnicities and clusters of people that lived in ethnic communities throughout the United States, offering a picture of geographical and ethnic diversity and celebrating it. It was widely distributed, and it showed images of African American and white sharecroppers bent over together farming, and it became a significant cause focus, and Warren Barbour was the chair of it all. This next list is a list of publications that the Council Against Intolerance in America put out. So, you can see some of the topics: American unity, we're all Americans, the Jew in American life, the Negro in American life, et cetera, et cetera. I became aware of Warren Barbour and got interested in his career in my capacity at the Jewish Historical Society, when I found this article in a Paterson Jewish newspaper entitled Tolerance. And it was a column written by W. Warren Barbour, and it was directed at, at, our community back in the 30s, preaching and advocating for tolerance for ethnic and racial and religious minorities. And he took it upon himself to develop that column. Oops. I'm sorry, hold on. Warren Barbour's most dramatic was in response to anti-Semitism took place in Washington. Increasingly desperate Jewish communities, we're going back to into the 1940s when he was reelected as a senator. The Jewish communities were responding to news from Europe that expressed the dire circumstances that were taking place under Nazi persecution. On October 6, 1943, just 3 days before Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, an Orthodox rescue committee brought more than 400 rabbis from around the country to Washington, D.C. to plead for a plan for rescue. When this group of Orthodox rabbis, who were not politically influential, these were rabbis of small, largely immigrant congregations throughout the country, came to Washington, they had a troubling response. The rabbis marched to the White House, where a delegation of their leaders had hoped to meet briefly with President Roosevelt. They were informed by Presidential Secretary Marvin McIntyre that the president was unavailable, although according to the president's schedule, he had no appointments that afternoon. While the rabbis waited outside, the president's aides wheeled him out of the rear exit of the White House so that he could avoid the protesters. It was not a moment that we look back on with pride. In spite of the White House reaction, Senator Barbour and a handful of his colleagues in the Senate welcomed this group and heard their concern. Days later, on October 15, 1943, Warren Barbour introduced a bill in the United States Senate urging the annual admission for the duration of the war and 6 months afterwards of up to 100,000 refugees from Europe who were being persecuted because of their race or religious faith. It would have been the first concrete response by the United States government to the Nazis' ongoing mass murder of millions of European Jews. Unfortunately, the legislative efforts did not go forward. The next month, on November 22nd, 1943, Senator Barbour suffered a fatal heart attack at his home in Washington, D.C. He was just 55 years old. Barbour's resolution on refugees had been referred to the Senate Immigration Committee as a matter of routine. The resolution never made it out of the committee and never reached the floor of the Senate. The process of advancing such a resolution required an energetic effort by a lead sponsor. In this case, the resolution no longer had its lead. When Barbour passed away and nobody stepped into that role, the bill died. Soon after Barbour's passing, the entire issue of rescue became a major public controversy. A small number of refugees ultimately were permitted, and a story about their rescue and the lives of their descendants was recently recounted in the New York Times. Barbour's untimely death has been attributed to family issues. Some in the family have speculated that Barbour's issues with alcohol led to the deterioration of his marriage. In 1941, he was divorced and his ex-wife was awarded the full custody of their three minor children, all of which probably undermined Barbour's physical health and well-being. It was really a tragedy on multiple levels. After the funeral at St. Paul's Episcopal Church on Broadway in Paterson, Warren Barbour was buried in the family plot at Cedar Lawn Cemetery in Paterson. You can see the large memorial stone with the word Barbour inscribed on it is at Cedar Lawn, and he was buried along with other members of his family near that site. I want to close by I just wanted this picture. I'm sorry. This picture shows Warren Barbour in Paterson greeting local citizens. I think that this shows him at the height of his charm as a politician, and as a senator, and it really gives a great sense of his warmth and presence. I want to close this presentation with a quote from Senator Barbour's column that appeared in Paterson's Jewish newspaper in February 1941. There can be no peace until human beings everywhere recognize the rights of others less fortunate than they, or possess different religious or philosophies, to live and work under comparable conditions of comfort and freedom. Tolerance lies at the bottom of the entire problem, of the whole problem. Enduring peace will be found only in the doctrine of live and let live. Wise words, and so relevant today. So I have some final thoughts on the legacy of Warren Barbour. Since researching the story, I have been looking for that rosebud or the Rosetta Stone that gives insight into the goodness that characterized so much of his work, and that I've highlighted here tonight. I've discussed this with professional scholars, family members, scoured the records, and no dice. I have nothing to report. I'm not there yet. In fact, I have come around to the view that there may be no aha episode or moment or incident. Barbour's goodness defies stereotypes and frustrates Hollywood endings. And let me be clear, the Barbours are not a family of do-gooders, and Warren Barbour, I'm sure, had his flaws and faults, as we all do. As you've seen, the Barbours were consummate business people, and they did it very well. For over 200 years, the family owned and operated a very large linen thread company. It was, in fact, the largest in the world, and had interests in other major industries. In particular, Warren Barbour's family was the consummate big picture deal maker. And yet, there were lessons of decency in that family that must have been passed to Warren. Both of his parents were actively supporters of good causes. His father reportedly cared a lot about the people he worked with, and had a very fine personal reputation that was well reported. And of course, having the financial independence in a business that was very successful and had no direct competition allowed Warren Barbour to do what he felt was right, with limited concerns about financial consequences. That's a good thing, and may have influenced him, but it certainly is no assurance that someone with those resources would do that. All that said, Warren Barbour did the right thing very frequently, and I'd like, and as we close this, I want all of us to celebrate Warren Barbour and be inspired by the stretch that he made from the comfort that went beyond the comfort of his life circumstances to a larger, more important realm. So here's to Warren Barbour and the values he espoused. Um, I think I just have, this is the poster from the event that the Jewish Historical Society had back in November pre-pandemic. And I want to thank a few minutes to thank some people, many people who helped shape this program over the years. The Jewish Historical Society of North Jersey was an active sponsor and promoted the research, much of the research, and had a wonderful day back in November in 2019. Dr. Raphael Medoff of the David Wyman Institute did much of the hard work getting the program underway. In preparing tonight's talk, I want to acknowledge the work of Martha Higgins, a former teacher here in New Jersey and a granddaughter-in-law of William Warren Barbour. She wrote a detailed thesis on his life, which was very insightful and extraordinarily well researched. Her husband, Jamie Higgins, one of Barbour's grandchildren, was indispensable in coordinating the Barbour family for our program in November 2019. And Jamie has been very generous in sharing thoughtful insights into the family and the character of the senator, even though they never met. I value his thoughts and conversations. I've come around, yep, it's complicated. I get it. I also want to acknowledge the participation of many of the Barbour grandchildren at our Barbour weekend. It was great to meet them all. And of course, the Paterson Museum, Jack and Heather, Glenn, even when he's not stuck in traffic, are very helpful and important. And I also want to reach back and acknowledge some research that was done way back in the 1970s that was led by a young teacher at Paterson Catholic School, a man named John A. Herbst, who directed a student project that I found in the archives of the county museum. I reached out to Mr. Herbst, and who has gone on to a very distinguished career, and he clearly inspired students back in the day to research the Barbours and their influence on the city. And we had a very nice phone call that where I reminded him of the Paterson institutions that he was a part of, and I learned about him. So I think that that concludes my presentation. Hopefully we have time for a few comments or questions. How am I doing? Oh, I am running over. I thought we'd be done by 8, but sometimes the story gets so compelling you have to tell it.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. I got out of the traffic and I'm online now. I got in a little bit late tonight. Yeah. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. And we've got a few questions and a few comments, actually. They're coming in now. The first is from Karen Patterson, who wants to thank you for a great presentation. John Lawrence has a specific question for you. Given his advocacy for immigrants, Jews, and African Americans, what do you know about Barbour's attitudes toward the Barbour family employees during this period? Was it a contentious one in terms of textile labor relations, things like that?
It isn't. It was as I've tried to describe, this was a company that was out of the competitive world. They were market makers, not market takers, and they could afford to be a little better to their employees than most of the textile companies were in Paterson. The silk industry was incredibly competitive, and silk mill owners were always looking to cut costs and were always in conflict with their workers. There were no reports of strikes during the early 20th century. There was a strike in the 1940s during the war years, but that there were no reports of strikes. I think that the barbers were a little more. I don't want to say generous, but I would say that they were able to pay a little bit better, provide other kinds of benefits that made working there. There were reports of them when other mills were on strike. The workers would come and work for them. There were reports of that. Were they the beneficent? This was tough work, and it was hard work, and I'm sure that the conditions and the pay was less than glamorous, but they seem to have avoided the serious labor conflicts that took place in and were manifest in some of the strikes and outbreaks that happened. Any other questions, Glenn? Glenn, I think.
If you can hear me, from what, oh, I'm sorry. Go
Now
ahead,
I can
Richard.
hear you fine.
Okay. A question from Barbara Heinrichs is, where did they obtain the flax for the mills?
Initially, it came from Ireland, and then they ended up, I think, with American suppliers. But when they first started out, the flax was grown in Ireland, and that's why the mills were there. And it came over in a raw state, and then would be treated here in New Jersey.
Right. And Bob Brander also wants to thank you for a very interesting program as well. So
thank you, Bob Brander.
It was a very wonderful program. Just a couple notes. From Barbara Heinrichs, Barbara's back again. She wants to know that she wants you to point out that there's a Barber Street in Heldon. So
there are Barber Streets all over our area. There's Barber, of course. You know, the Barber Pond was built was a man-made pond to provide water for the mills and the race and some of the industrial processing. It wasn't done as a public gesture. It became a public gesture. But there's Barber Streets and all over the place in our area, and the barbers were well known in other parts of the country as well.
Right. Elaine Person also wants to thank you for a great presentation.
Another Eastside High School classmate. Nice to hear from you.
There you go. She's another ghost, right?
Other ghost.
Okay. I think we're in good shape. I'm just checking here. Just a couple more thank yous from EJ Plum is the last one. And I think that's a wrap for tonight. So thank you, Richard.
Okay.
For a wonderful presentation on the barbers. And we'll see you in December probably. So, please watch our Facebook page. That's where everything happens. Okay. All the dates and all the stuff happens on our Facebook page. So we'll announce the date for that book event with Richard at the museum in December. So, okay.
Very good.
So thank you all. Have a good evening.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. Good night, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Take care, folks.